our incoming ARS president. He'll be installed in San Diego next year. Be sure you go to that convention. It will be a blowout. Meanwhile, Bob has served as district director for the Pacific Southwest District on 1.5 jillion committees for ARS, on the trusts, and he's the author of several books, some noted in the write-up, some not because I didn't have room. Meanwhile, this man is very cool with the sense of humor, so listen carefully because there's going to be little things coming up. Bob.
I'm contemplating what I've got here. Let's see. I'm called upon to speak without a microphone. I get to follow Dr. Tommy Cairns. I get to speak to you after lunch when everyone is half asleep. And I'm asked as I'm going out to, what is this talk about? Well, it's about baseball, sorta. Most of you are familiar, particularly if you're from my generation, with Yogi Berra, who's widely considered the greatest catcher of all time, Hall of Fame, years and years with the Yankees, appeared in more World Series than any player in history, more winning World Series games than any player in history, a successful manager, managing World Series winning teams in the American and the National League. So anyway, I was talking about Yogi Berra. And for those of you who have been waiting for a talk on baseball, this is not about baseball, because Yogi Berra, although he was such a great catcher, has also had another great contribution to the American language. In fact, he wrote a book called I Really Didn't Say Everything I Said. And he actually did say most of the things that he said, and I have placed them in. And what this program is about, actually, is showing roses. My experience as a rose show veteran is what I put in the title, and I start with my third rose garden. Those of you who have heard my program before a couple of years ago when I spoke about everything about roses I learned in kindergarten may recall this slide. This was actually my third rose garden. I had grown roses in 2 gardens before I ever attended or even heard about a rose show. And when I had moved into this garden, moved into this house and planted a brand new garden, I received a phone call from out of nowhere from an individual who said, I'd like to invite you to the next meeting of the Pasadena Rose Society. And I said, I didn't even know there was a Pasadena Rose Society. He said, well, there is now, because we moved a society into Pasadena. We'd like you to attend as my guest. And we're meeting at Pasadena City College on Thursday night. I think this call was either on a Sunday or Monday night. And I said, fine, I will go to that. And so I met him there. And at the very first meeting I was at, the speaker was talking about showing roses. And I had been growing roses at the time. This is in 1985, and I planted my first rose garden in 1971. So I had been growing roses for 14 years. And I thought I knew everything about roses, and so I would come to a rose show and show people how wonderful I was as a gardener and how my beautiful roses would be. We had a little rose show. Yogi Berra liked to talk about Little League. He said, I think Little League is wonderful. It keeps the kids out of the house. Well, I think little rose shows are wonderful as well. It gets me out of the house, or it got me out of the house. We were going to be sponsoring a rose show in November. This was in September when I went to the meeting, and so we had a little rose show in October. And I came to the little rose show and I brought a specimen of Double Delight. I imagined it looked as good as that specimen. In truth, it probably did not, but it was a beautiful specimen. And I entered it in the open class. I did not enter it in the novice class. And it received a blue ribbon, and afterwards, one of the exhibitors who had won that class walked up to me and said, Bob, why didn't you put that rose in the novice class? Isn't this your first show? And I said, well, it is, but from what I understand from talking to some people, is you're the best exhibitor in the society, and I wanted to see if I could beat you. Well, let me tell you who that was. That was our preceding speaker, Dr. Tommy Cairns, who looked at me as if my head was on backwards. And that's how we met back in 1986, was at a little rose show. Well, it took a long time, and I finally did, as you notice from the date, 2 years later, win my Novice Trophy. Here we have Yogi Berra's advice, which would be good advice for anybody showing roses. I tell the kids, somebody's got to win, somebody's got to lose, just don't fight about it, just try to get better. And so I tried to get better, and I entered roses, and I finally had a specimen of Sonia, which I imagine looked as good as that because I don't have an actual picture of it, which won a Novice Trophy on October 18th, 1988. I decided that I wanted to be an exhibitor, and I went to our district convention in April 1989, and I was invited to join the exhibitors at dinner. And I sat next to Jeff Stage. This is Jeff Stage here, who is one of the great San Diego exhibitors, who had all kinds of advice for me. In fact, he never got to eat his dinner because I had so many questions of him. He didn't quite say, I mean, he basically said, I remember how he started, he says, well, Bob, you obviously know how to grow roses, but the way you want to show roses, so what you have to do what you know how to do. He would say something like, baseball is 90% mental, the other half is physical. I would say showing roses is the same, 90% of it's mental and the other half is physical. I had the privilege many years later as the chairman of the American Rose Society Horticultural Exhibitors Committee of presenting Jeff Stage with the Blake Hedrick Award for Exhibiting Excellence, which is a Lifetime Achievement Award, which incidentally I have received, and so has Dr. Tommy Cairns. There's that saying that I had in the title. After I had decided I wanted to become an exhibitor, I talked to my mentor. Actually, he bought me for as a Christmas present a grooming kit in a box that I still use to this day. All the tools have long since been replaced by other tools, and I'll get to that later. But he decided to come over and help me for my first show. And it wasn't early, it was April, actually 22nd, 1990. It was going to be my first show as a real exhibitor. And he came over to help me prepare blooms. He was there the day before, and we went out and cut some specimens. And I think we maybe had 8, maybe 10 possible entries. And then I went to bed. And as I was about to go to bed, he says, well, we got to be there at 6 o'clock in the morning. Well, I want to tell you that I have never been a morning person. I'm the night owl. I'm the classic night owl. And I looked at him and I said, what are you, you're crazy. I am never anywhere but in bed at 6 o'clock in the morning. He says, no, we're going to be there at 6 o'clock. We have to get all of our entries in. I said, we got 6, 8 entries. He said, doesn't matter. You've got to be there because it gets late early out here. I don't think he said that exactly, but that's the way it is at a rose show. It gets late very, very early when you're trying to make entries. That is, by the way, me at a later time in the dark. We have our shows in October. This is the Orange County show, which is right after daylight savings time switches, so we are preparing roses and making entries in the dark because it gets late early out here. I did go to bed, and I kind of woke up in the middle of the night because I heard some noises, and I went down to the kitchen, and here is my mentor in the kitchen at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he's got the roses lined up in front of him. Maybe there's a dozen. I don't know. There was not a whole lot of entries. And he says, well, we'll put these in for Queen. I said, what are you talking about? I just won one Novice Trophy, and I'm going to put them in for Queen? Well, no, that's the way he said, well, this is what we've got to do. It's like, it's like what it is with a rose show. I like Yogi Berra's. If people don't want to come out to the ballpark, nobody's going to stop them If you don't want to go to the rose show, nobody's going to stop you. So, all right, we went and prepared the roses, and I got up, and we got there by 6 o'clock, and we made all the entries, and we won nothing. The following week, which was actually April 29th, 1990, he having schooled me in at least the routine that you go through to go to a rose show, I did it on my own. I went to the rose show, and I won Miniature Queen of Show with a specimen of Jean Keneally that I imagine looked as good as that. I don't have an actual picture of it, but I remember it in my mind's eye to this day, my first Queen of Show that I put in for Queen. My first national show was the following year. Some of you were there. 1991, San Jose. And I planned to go to the national show, so I got the show schedule, and I studied the show schedule to see what kind of entries that I could make. And it had a class in it that called for a rose in a wine bottle. Keep in mind, I am a new exhibitor. I am attracted to this class because my brother is a collector of wines, and he had recently acquired a number of wine bottles. Wines were in the bottles from the Crocker estate from the 1850s. And in fact, he had a bottle that they had drank the wine out of, and I said, I have the best bottle. I can go win this class because I've got the best bottle to take to the class. And I took up and I put a rose in my bottle, and I recall talking to my mentor again at the rose show, and I said, well, what'd you get in the entry? Actually, I think I was talking to him on the phone. I said, well, they had this class for the best bottle, and I put in an 1850 wine bottle, and I am sure I'm going to win that class. And he laughed. He says, you idiot. He says, the best rose is going to win the class. I don't care about the wine bottle. And in fact, I don't remember what rose won, but I know the wine bottle that won was a bottle of Gallo. Oh, a nickel ain't worth a dime anymore, says Yogi Berra. At that show, of course, I'm still a very new exhibitor, and I was like the 1973 Mets that Yogi Berra described as overwhelming underdogs. And I was an overwhelming underdog at the show. But one thing I had at the show was a number of Little Jackie. Remember the miniature rose, Little Jackie? Well, actually, I had 8 bushes of Little Jackie that all had come into bloom. And the reason I had 8 bushes is because my mother had a brother who died in infancy whose name was Jackie. It was known as Little Jackie. And all my life, there was a photograph framed in our house of Little Jackie. So when the rose Little Jackie came out, I had to have this rose from my mother. And so I planted 8 Little Jackies, and they were all in bloom. And that's almost just about what I had at this show, was this fistful of Little Jackies. Well, they had a class, the D. Bennett Memorial, that required that you show 12 miniature roses in a clear vase without any support at the time. You couldn't use wedging and so on in the vase. And I took up a number of vases, and I showed them to my then wife who had come to arrange them, and she looked at the vases and she says, none of these will do. None will do. Okay, I said, but we have to have a clear container. So she went and rummaged around in the hotel bar and came up with a champagne flute out of the hotel bar, staged the Little Jackie in, which won the D. Bennett National Challenge class in 1991, my first national trophy. So it's interesting, I could not win with my wine bottle, but we won with the bar's wine glass. In order to go to national shows, I wanted to pick up the opportunity. I wanted to go to national shows. I wanted to travel. So in order to travel, you need luggage, right? Yogi Berra said, why buy good luggage? You only need it when you travel. Well, my mentor by then had left and retired, and he gave me his travel boxes, which were very similar to these type of boxes. They were then made by a company called Gott, and were known as Gott boxes with the coolers in the lid. And one had to develop he had inside of these boxes these little wooden racks that he had developed. And he explained to me how to pack roses in it, and contemplating a trip to Shreveport, we had a show in Phoenix, Arizona. Not very far away, but I thought, okay, I'm going to fly roses to Phoenix, Arizona to see if I can do this. And I packed the roses in these little racks back and forth inside the little racks and sealed the thing up and turned it into luggage at the airline at the time. And we arrived in Phoenix, Arizona, and the baggage carousel in Phoenix then looks pretty much the same as it does now. And my boxes came tumbling out onto the baggage carousel. You remember that commercial years ago of I think it was for Samsonite, where the luggage went into the room where the gorillas threw it all around? Well, apparently what has happened with my travel boxes, they were thrown around, and I opened them up, and the heads had been guillotined off of nearly every rose. I entered several floating head classes. Didn't win any of those. I won one thing at that show, which is interesting. At the very last moment, I had put in a specimen of topaz jewel, which is a rugosa, a yellow single rugosa, but it was just a bud. It was kind of an afterthought. Oh, look at that bud. I'll cut it. I put it at the top of the box. Because it was at the top of the box, it didn't lose its head. Because it got shaken up real well, I put it into a vase. It won the best shrub. All right, here's the rest of this story. They put it on the trophy table, and when I came back from the exhibitor's lunch, the petals of the rose had all fallen off the rose and were arranged in a perfect circle around the base of the vase. And there was a couple standing there looking at it, trying to understand the purpose of an exhibit where you would exhibit a rose with the petals arranged around the base. Having learned how to travel, at least with roses, or at least what not to do, I was prepared to go to the National Convention in Shreveport, Louisiana, the following weekend in May of 1992. And I had packed the boxes all very carefully this time, having gotten cushion foam rubber to cushion all the roses. I packed up all these roses, and I took them to the airport. And there was a problem going on at the airport, and the problem at the airport is that planes were not landing because they were being shot at, because it was right in the middle of the Rodney King riots. And my plane was canceled. I have 2 boxes full of roses. It's Friday morning, my plane flight, I've already traveled to the airport. I am driving back, and I am seeing this on the other side of the freeway. Troops, military vehicles. You know, that would freak other people out. Me, all I could think about is I got 2 boxes of roses. What am I going to do with them? And it came to me, I said, wait a second, the Santa Barbara Rose Show is this weekend. Went back, unpacked the boxes, pulled out the best roses, went back into the garden, packed them with 0 sleep, got in the car, drove to the Santa Barbara Rose Show Saturday morning, and won my first Queen of Show. My first big Queen of Show with Anastasia, which I imagine looked as good as that picture, but I don't have a picture of it either. My 4th rose garden. Now I am a serious exhibitor. This is the rose garden, as you can see, is nothing but a lot of roses, and they're all exhibition roses. And I am learning more things about roses. Here's a Yogi Berrism. You've got to be very careful if you don't know where you're going, because you might not get there. I was traveling to a rose show, in fact, the San Diego Rose Society show, with my dear friend at the time, Lynn Schnetzinger, who I went to all the rose shows with for 7 or 8 years. And we got to talking roses, and we're talking roses, and we're talking roses, and we're talking roses. And I'm traveling at 70 miles an hour in the left lane of the freeway, and I look up and I see this sign here. You can't quite see it. What it says is last exit before Mexico. I've got an entire car full of roses. The thought of me driving into Mexico and trying to come back in with all these roses flashed briefly. I went across 4 lanes of traffic. I made the last exit before Mexico. We turned around, got back to the show, and I can report did very well at it. 1997. I developed it, having had poor success with these racks in this thing. I decided that I would get tubes. 3-inch PVC tubes. I would drop the roses down inside the tubes, put a orchid tube at the end with water, and that's the way I transport them to the rose. So now I am going to Shreveport, Louisiana, which involves a flight out of Burbank, where I was at the time, into Phoenix, into Houston, and into Shreveport. So as we were flying out of Phoenix, I noticed something odd. The plane was turning around. The plane was going back to make just one more landing, just to really screw things up with my roses. And the pilot comes on, and it's one of these, well, you may wonder why we're turning back. Well, yes, we are wondering why you're turning back. Well, there was a little smoke in the galley, and it's not a problem to be concerned about, but we are going to go back and check that out. And I said, oh, great, I've got roses. I got 2 containers of roses in there, and we're going to go back and check out to see whether or not the plane is going to catch on fire. We landed like this. This is what was waiting for us. Several of them lining the runway. The firemen in full gear come running onto the plane to conclude there is no problem. They switched planes, reloaded, we took off. We got to Shreveport. The next morning I opened up my coolers, I take the roses out, and with all the landing and takeoff and landing, the roses go back and forth inside the tubes. And let me tell you what happens when you take a refrigerated rose and bump it up against something. It ruins your rose. Cannot be done. And all of my roses at that one were ruined. I decided to drive. The National Convention in 1998 was in Albuquerque. This is 1,200 miles. That seemed to be within my range. So I built this box. You see this refrigerated box? That's how the roses got to Albuquerque. I very carefully measured my Jeep at the time. Those of you who have a Jeep will notice that it is missing the little light that's right there. I forgot to measure that part of it. I couldn't get this thing in the car until I took apart the roof of the car, but I got it in there. I got the roses to the show and did very well. In 1999, the National Convention was in Orlando. And in Orlando, Florida, now we're talking 3,000 miles. But have I developed a scheme? Yes, I have, to keep the roses from moving back and forth. I tied a piece of green tape around the end, the gardening ribbon, brought it up, smacked on a cap on it that kept it from moving back and forth. I tested it by hitting a baseball with this thing. And it did not move the rose inside. I got the roses to Orlando, Florida. They have a class for 3 hybrid teas, the Pacific Rose Society Challenge class. You have to travel at least 200 miles. I had traveled 3,000. Thank you very much. I'm going to enter this class. Also in this class was entered Dennis Bridges, who had the record for having won this class on 7 previous occasions. Fred and Marlon Wright from the top national exhibitors, but I was dissuaded. Oh, as Yogi said, I always thought that record would stand until it was broken, and we won. I won that class. That was, in fact, the winning entry in 1999 in Orlando. 2000, I flew to Houston, now having resolved and figured out how to fly roses to shows. Yogi Berra is the author of the quote, "It's like deja vu all over again." And with deja vu all over again, we won the D. Bennett National Trophy for the 12 miniature roses, this time with 6 glowing amber and 6 amber star. It's sport. 2000, I flew to the National Miniature Show in Missoula, Montana. And I was having problems getting my miniatures on the plane because I had to cut them too short. If you wanted to put them in the overhead rack, as a matter of fact, I had a problem one time in the overhead rack which decided to leak and spill water on the people sitting 2 seats behind me and trying to explain what's going on with this stuff dripping out of the overhead rack. So I was interested to learn how Dr. Tommy Cairns got his roses all the way to New Zealand and to England and the places that he would fly to. And he gave a lecture on how he did that. There, in fact, was at the lecture. I was sitting in the front row making notes about everything that he said. His box, how he put it together, what the construction of the box was. It had to be exactly this kind of box. The coolant, I made a note of the kind of coolant that he used. I looked it up online to find out where I can get this coolant. I could only get this coolant if I ordered a pallet that was delivered by truck from Northern California. I had a truck arrive and deliver to me an entire pallet of coolant to make this box. I duplicated Tommy Cairns' box right down to the T, and I flew that box to Atlanta, Georgia, and I opened the box when I got to Atlanta, Georgia, and it was too warm inside and the roses were blowing. So I went and found Tommy and I said, "Tommy, would you come and look at this and tell me what the problem is?" And he comes over and he touches the side and he touches the coolant and he looks at me and he asks me that question. "How cold is your freezer?" And I looked at him and I said, "Freezing?" He said something to the effect of, "No, you idiot, these are 20-degree freezer packs. You have to take them down to 20 degrees to get them to hold." I said, "You didn't say that." He says, "It's written on the side of the package, Bob." In 2002, I moved to Arizona to marry a beautiful woman, which is the only logical reason anybody would ever move to Arizona for. Particularly if you're a rose grower. The first summer we were there, we had 125 consecutive days of over 100 degrees. As Yogi would say, it ain't the heat, it's the humility. And in Arizona, I learned humility in growing roses. This is what it's like in Arizona. This is 100 degrees. It starts right there at the end of April, the beginning of May. It stays like that until October. It is a tough place to grow roses. I've heard people talk about, you had some 110-degree days, and yes, that's very tough on roses. The last summer I was in Arizona, we had 34 days, not consecutive, just 34 days in the summer in which the temperature was over 110. Many of the roses did not survive. This is why I am not growing roses in Arizona anymore. However, I must tell you that they grow beautiful. They grow beautiful. Here I am standing among the roses. That's where I learned about Fortuniana rootstock, which does so well in Arizona and also in Southern California. You will notice here, this picture was run in the American Rose magazine when they awarded me the Blake Hedrick Medal. And I am wearing what many of you will know is my standard garden outfit, which is a Cleveland Indians baseball hat. Yogi wrote, "Never answer an anonymous letter." I always liked that. Right after that picture, and about 2 months after that picture was run, I received a letter from the president of the Cleveland Indians. That's the letter. which basically was thrilled by the prospect because they were moving their training camp to Arizona, that they had at least one fan in Arizona. Which concluded at the bottom with Go Tribe. In Arizona, I had some success. Here was our first district, McFarland, which we won in 2006, which calls for 5 hybrid teas. In the one summer, actually the one April, when all the roses all came into bloom at the same time. Now, skipping far forward, Escondido, California. This is where we live right now. This is the picture that you would have seen in the program that I previously gave. You'll notice something odd about this program, at least odd to a group of Rosarians. See this stuff here? Well, this is what that looks like now. The excuse is that the lawn died in the drought, so we had to do something about replacing it, so we replaced it with a rose garden. So that's the front yard, that's the backyard, just to show you where I'm growing roses now. I wanted to provide a few tips for those of you who are perhaps intrigued by my failures as well as my successes in showing roses, that you can do this, or you should be doing this, because it is a lot of fun. And I'm going to give you some tips about how you can go about showing roses that might assist you in doing so. Yogi Berra said, the future ain't what it used to be. The future of a rose, Jeff Stage was right when he said, you know how to grow roses. The point is you just simply have to do it. The roses don't care what your excuse is for not having fed them or watered them or done anything to them. They go and respond appropriately. So if you're going to succeed, you need to do what you know how to do, and to do it regularly. You do need to do a few things that are unusual, like learn how to disbud a rose. This is automatic with me. If I'm standing in your rose garden, you'll see I'm probably over there disbudding your roses. I recall I was at Frank Grasso's garden once at a national convention. There were 3 exhibitors standing there talking, and we were all absent-mindedly disbudding his roses. He walks up and says, keep that up, move over there next. You need to, we all hear these wonderful stories. You go out the morning of the show or out the night before with your flashlight, and behold, the Queen of Show is just sitting there. Well, that happens. It's happened probably to many of us. It's even happened to me. But most of the time, the Queen of Show is there because you found the Queen of Show a week to 2 weeks beforehand, and you made way for it. You stake up your stem so that it's nice and straight, and you get the stuff out from around it that might blow against it and affect it, and you have an opportunity to increase your chance of growing Queens of Show. You need some way of getting the roses in from your garden. I'm a fan of Bloomsavers. I still don't understand why these things cost so much, but I use them, and I have certain traditions, I guess, superstitions would probably be a better word. My Dickies yellow cups, this is the best barbecue in my opinion in the country, and the best for if you want to take mini flowers to the rose show, or put them in those little containers in the Bloomsaver and take them out. That's a good thing to use. The double gulp 64-ounce cup. I wanted to make sure I thanked Jolene and the organizers for bringing in the Diet Dr. Pepper. I was the one who asked for that. I told them I needed to have that so I could stay awake through the next speaker. There is what it looks like in my garage. When we cut for the show, you can see all the roses being brought in those containers. I have florist containers that I fill with water, as you can see, that we put the roses in that sit there in order to draw up water and become fully hydrated. Cutting for the show. See all those cups. That's how I go about it. And here I am. They usually at a rose show, if it's a big rose show, those that are cut, wanders into the house. This is in the kitchen. At the kitchen counter, as you can see, I'm working on roses that have been cut for a rose show. You need to develop some method of refrigeration. This is an old Bev Air cooler that costs about, I can't even Donna does not let me run this thing except during show season because the electricity that's required to run it is high. So there you can see the cooler itself, and these are the inside of the coolers. This is what I would like to have. This is what Dr. Satish Prabhu has. It's based upon an article by Harold Baker on called The Coolest Cooler, where he basically took a freezer, and the freezer is just instead of set at freezing temperatures with a temperature controller so you can have the roses down in it. Gary Bowman, who is a very successful exhibitor in Southern California, has this. And if any of you are interested in the coolest cooler, I have all the literature on how you can make one yourself. How do you pack for a rose show? You use what you can. This is Tom Cooney, is one of our exhibitors from the Orange County Rose Society. As you can see, here are these PVC tubes, which are the 4-inch ones. He has them extended with X-ray plastic buckets. For those of you who tend swimming pools will recognize that. You know, whatever way you can develop at getting them to a show. I actually cut 4-inch tubes and I drop the roses down inside of them so that it protects the heads from being knocked back and forth. And here's a picture down into what I use in order to get the hybrid teas to the shows. You will notice around them is a little frilly thing that looks like kind of a queen's collar. Well, what that is a coffee filter. The story behind that is the first time I decided to put a rose down inside the cooler because I thought it was a cool idea. I just dropped it into the cooler and the rough edges of the tube just sheared the edges of the petals off. I said, well, that is going to work. So I create a little cone, so to speak, of the coffee filter and use that when I drop it down. I also took a propane torch and smoothed out the edges of the PVC pipe in order to drop them down in there. Here are my crates. Here you can see the coolers that we take to a rose show. Sometimes you have developed things. One thing that I have had a lot of success at, and people have asked me how it is showing the miniature box. And that's because I developed this thing years ago. Just see, that's a piece of whatever it is you can stick the little orchid tubes into. One's upside down there. That's so I can lift it in and take it out of that little lunchbox. And I go out, usually the last thing before a rose show, that will hold 14 heads, and cut 14 heads of a miniature rose in order to make a box, drop them into the lunchbox. You do have to remember to take the lunchbox with you. Yes, I did that once also, left it at home. Another time you need to remember to open the lunchbox and actually take the entry out. I did that one time too, leaving the lunchbox under the table I was working on and discovering it after the show closed. I use this to travel with miniature roses. It's a variation on what I just described, a board where I can put the heads of miniature roses for those. Here is the car. I still have this car, the Mazda. Here it is loaded up for a rose show. And as you can see, it is pretty well loaded. And when we went to this rose show, the Desert Rose Show, we did very well, but I wound up having to leave about half the roses I cut at home. And so I got back and I said to Donna, my wife, we need a bigger car. So we bought this, the Armada. You know, I'm going to take an Armada to the rose show. Other people buy a car for various reasons. I buy a car so I can load it full of roses and take it to a rose show. And here we have the Armada. Well, let me tell you something about the Armada. First of all, this light. You see that light? That light has a meaning. The other car, the light like that has been on in the other car for the last 3 years, and so I'd assumed that it didn't mean anything, or at least it wasn't a big problem. The Thursday night before the District Rose Show in Arizona, Donna was traveling, and I picked her up at the airport, and as I came home, this light came on. And I said, well, you know, the light's been on like that in the other car. We'll ignore that, and I will pack the car for the rose show. and we will drive tomorrow all the way to Arizona to take all these roses to the district show. Well, let me show you what happens when you do that. This is the Armada on the tow vehicle after it blew its tire out in the express lane of the 15 freeway at 70 miles an hour. Well, I got it over there. We got the car when Donna found the only place in San Diego. If you're ever in San Diego at midnight and you need a tire, I have a place for you. We negotiated a tire, got the tire replaced. We're back on the road by 2 o'clock in the morning. I'd like to say we got to the rose show. The answer is we did not get to the rose show because of that. Well, I hated the Armada because it was the Armada's fault for that. So this is what we now have. We have a Chevrolet Traverse, which, as you can see, it was this picture that sold me on this car. We have taken it to a couple of rose shows, and so it has yet to blow out a tire. I'm still holding out for this. But I have not yet convinced her of that. When you go to a show, here's one of my favorite sayings. I made this one up. When in Rome, show as the Romans do. Folks back east are amazed when I give this program and I show how we in Southern California set up for a rose show in the parking lot. This is a district show. When you're in a district show and you're set up in a parking lot, you got to know which way the wind comes. Baldo took this picture, as a matter of fact. This was after I had entered a bunch of roses. You see a couple of them sitting back there. That's where I groomed them and put them in there to protect them from being blown over by the wind. This is my supply box I take to a rose show. I won't go into the details of it, but you can see I have there. Oh, I like this. When one time Yogi Berra was asked for the time, he said, "Do you mean now?" This is Donna preparing at the 2014 National. The reason I have this, you see what's right here? This is a stack of entry tags. I make the entry tags out the night before the show. Not now, not at the rose show. And you see them there, and in fact, that's a spreadsheet that has all of our prospective entries on it, so I can keep track of it. Crazy? Yes, it works in terms of entering the entry tags. A few points about making rose show entries for you. Cleanliness. P.J. O'Rourke said cleanliness becomes more important when godliness is unlikely. And since godliness is unlikely among rose show judges, cleanliness matters. So you need clean foliage. You need to avoid rookie mistakes like leaving on side growth. This was in a national challenge class. You don't want to be like Yogi Berra said, we made too many wrong mistakes. In baseball, you don't know nothing. Well, people who don't show roses don't know what stem on stem is. That's a stem on stem. And when you see an entry, you're not supposed to have the stem on another stem unless it's an old garden rose or a shrub. You should learn how to wedge your entries, which is to basically, I use the foam. Here's a tip. You want to cut your floral foam? A cheese knife works great for it. In fact, it's a very common sound at a rose show. People recognize I'm at a rose show. You hear this weird cutting over there, and I'm cutting wedges with a cheese knife. And as you can see, the wedge right there in the vase that I have pressed in there. A nickel ain't worth a dime anymore. Stem length. Here is Harold Baker. He was a fanatic like I am, and you can see him measuring the height. I recall one time at a rose show, Lynn Schnetzinger walked up to me and held out a bloom like that, and she says, "Bob, is this too high in the vase?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And she says, "You haven't even looked at it." And I said, "If you have to ask if it's too tall in the vase, it is." People say exhibiting is grooming. Here is the 2012 San Ramon show. Here I am working away at grooming roses. Grooming matters at a show. I like to emphasize this. I found this picture online. It is at an alpaca show. I have never been to an alpaca show. I have no idea what a winning alpaca should look like. I do know that this is a winning alpaca because of the fact that the guy is holding a big purple ribbon that appears to be a first place ribbon. So grooming matters. So when you learn how to groom roses, you can answer this. What can you do with this? Here's a grooming challenge for you. You see this problem with this rose? You see that double center right there? That's a grooming challenge. And if you groom that rose very much in a long time, you will run into what Dr. Satish Pradhu. This is what you will get. Dr. Prabhu says if you groom a dog well, you will wind up with a well-groomed dog. A rose with a double center cannot be groomed into a single center. Forget about it, put it aside, and work on something else. You need grooming tools. This is the box I told you about that was given to me so many years ago. Now with all the tools that I have in it, you'll notice an unusual tool in there. You see that? That's a wiener whistle. Why do I have a wiener whistle in my box? We were at a rose show once with my friend Alexa Fairbairn, and it was an inside preparation at the Descanso Gardens in California, outside of Los Angeles. And she starts humming the Oscar Mayer Wiener song. And we're all working away in there, and soon everyone in the room is singing the Oscar Mayer Wiener song. She won Miniature Queen that day, I won Big Queen that day. I concluded that that had something to do with it. And so I have to that day, from that day forward, carried a wiener whistle, and also I've got a little Hot Wheels Wienermobile in my grooming kit. You want to learn how to row roses, how to show roses, how to groom roses. Yogi Berra said it all. You can observe a lot just by watching. Here is the San Diego Rose Society show. That room was filled with roses at the end of July this year because of all the rain that we have. You do need to avoid talking to people while they're trying. You do not ask an exhibitor a bunch of questions 15 minutes before closing when he's got all these Q-tips in. I recall going to my first rose show, and I walked by all these Q-tips, and I go, what in the world? Well, I was like with Yogi Berra, it was impossible to get a conversation going because everybody was talking too much. I have tried various alternatives. My mentor actually taught me to use these little wedges. You wedge them, put them in the petals, and they got a spring to them, and they open the petals up. Great idea. Bad idea, look at the color of those. You cannot find them in your bloom after you've done that, and after having about a half a dozen entries disqualified, I said, I'm not going to do that. I've tried the cotton balls also, same problem. That's why I use Q-tips. My favorite grooming tools, for those of you who care, I use a brush, cosmetic brush, stamp dongs. If you're using tweezers, don't use the tweezers with the little points on them, because you point them through the holes you poke holes in your brooms. Done that also. Grooming foliage, decal edge scissors. You can go so far with decal edge scissors. If you have this kind of condition, you cannot fix it with decal edge scissors. You can groom petals. I didn't realize this, but you can just, you can trim petals. And you'll find that I use this as an example because I want to clean a show with this. This is the worst grooming petal job you have ever seen. I mean, a kindergarten could have done better than that. Nevertheless, you can groom petals knowing that you can do it. You need to be cautious with an X-Acto knife. You'll always hear about that from exhibitors and ask them how many times they have sliced the head off of their bloom. I have done that at least a half a dozen times. I've poked myself with them a few times as well. The toothbrush, you would say, well, what do you do with a toothbrush? Well, I discovered if you have powdery mildew on the calyx, that's the bottom part of the rose, and you got powdery mildew on it, you can take a little toothbrush and kind of wipe it off. I had a Miss Flippins one time. It had a bunch of mildew on it. I took my toothbrush, I went wing like that. The head of the rose went across the room. Be careful with the toothbrush. Specialty tools. I like cuticle nippers. You always get, often, at least once a show, I'll have a bloom, I'll look down into it, maybe it's got a little triangular petal looking right over the center of the rose, and you want to clip it out of there. Cuticle nippers, great for that purpose. I use the micro tip trimmers for trimming off little side buds, particularly the polyanthus. Here are tools that don't work. I could make an entire program out of this one. I saw an ad for a lighted high-band magnifier. Other people would look at that, and I don't know what your reaction would be, but as an exhibitor, I said, oh, what a great idea that was. I'll get that so I can see my blooms a lot more closely when I'm grooming. That does not work. I tried the clip and flip. This is what they use, in baseball. That doesn't work either. I was at the swap meet. They had a bunch of used dental tools. Oh, I'm looking at these tools. I bought a collection of used dental tools. I figured I'd find a use for them. The idea was I would take that mirror so I could examine the underside of the foliage of miniature roses. That was my idea. That is a dumb idea. If you want to look at the underside of the foliage of your miniature rose, you just look it up and look at it. And let me tell you something, the judges are not looking at the underside of your foliage in the first place. So I don't use the dental tools. There are other tools. I forget who told me. You use knitting needles. I always use a brush. So I got knitting needles. They're in my grooming kit. To this day, I got all these knitting needles. I have never used them. A ball stylus. Richard Anthony told me I must have the ball stylus. Same thing. Those sit in my grooming kit. I've never used them. I did try this idea once. I had a leaf fall off of a rose. And it was a leaf that was an important leaf, so I decided I would glue it back on with crazy glue. It does not work. What you have to do in order to win at a rose show is you need what Yogi Berra described as deep depth. We have deep depth. Here I am at the 2012 show, and to show you what I had is I had this army of mini floral roses lined up like that, and my good friend Peter Alonso helping me sort them out and figure out which ones we have, because we're looking at the J. Benjamin Williams Challenge class calls for 10 mini floral roses, either 10 different varieties or 2 each of 5 different varieties, which is why they're laid out like that, so we could just examine all this deep depth and decide which were the best. And that was the best, and that was the winner. I'm very proud of that entry, and I was asked afterwards why it is that the white roses are at the end. Because most people would look at that and say, well, shouldn't the white roses be in the middle? And the answer is, we tried it in the middle and it looked better at the end. And every judge I talked to afterwards said, that's kind of what I thought when I looked at it. It just looked better for some reason being at the end. Someone who's into design might explain that to me one day, but that's why we staged it that way. We also won at that show. Here, I like Yogi Berra. He hits from both sides of the plate. He's amphibious. I grow an amphibious rose. That's this rose here, Deidre Hall, which is great as a bud. It's great as an open bloom, and it has an excellent exhibition form. And that's exactly what this class calls for, the 3 stages of bloom. And we won this as well with my amphibious rose. My best advice was given to me by my old friend Carl Mahaney, who's still showing roses in San Diego after 40 years, 50 perhaps. And he says, take the best you've got and and do the best you can with it. And I took this picture, or somebody sent me this picture. This was at the San Ramon show. And you look at this picture, particularly the angle at which it's taken, and what's wrong with this picture? Well, what's wrong with that entry? What is this doing up here? Well, the point is that's the best I had. That was the best I could do with it. And it was the Floribunda Queen of Show at that show. Another event at that show illustrates Yogi Berra's It Ain't Over Until It's Over. As an afterthought, we drove up to San Ramon for the show from San Diego, from Escondido, and I put in a specimen of Rosa rugosa alba, a single, beautiful single, to enter in the Genesis class, and it was a bud. Drove all the way up, opened the box, there it was gorgeous. I very carefully carried it over to the placement table, and I spoke with the clerk, and I said, this rose has traveled 450 miles. And as I can see, it needs to go right over there for the Dowager class, which is about 30 feet, and I think that's about all that it has left. So would you very, very carefully take it over there? So he took it over and set it down as I asked. And he was waiting for me as I got back to the show, because he wanted to tell me the rest of the story. And the rest of the story was the judges came, it was beautiful, it was awarded the winner of the Genesis Award. It was carried over to the trophy table, and the petals fell off. So there's the winning, trophy-winning entry. It ain't over until it's over. In Escondido, we've had success. Here's the McFarland. This was the roses that were in the back of that van that Baldo took the picture of. I need to add one more thing, and that is an homage to my wife. Yogi Berra was asked, actually Yogi's wife's Carmen asked him, Yogi, you are from St. Louis, we live in New Jersey, and you played ball in New York. If you go before I do, where would you like me to have you buried? Yogi's response surprised me. This is Donna working at that same rose show where we're outside. She does these magical things of the entries of the old garden roses. Sometimes our entries don't win. This was a runner-up in 2014. Well, Satish wouldn't have won if we'd have beaten, if he hadn't. We would have, you wouldn't have won if we'd beaten you. Yes, that's what I could have said to him afterwards, but that was our losing entry put together by Donna. So I will sum up showing roses. Here's another picture that Donna took at me in the April 2013. You give 100% in the first half of the game, and if that isn't enough in the second half, you give what's left. If the world were perfect, it wouldn't be. This was supposed to be a class calling for two identical blooms, matched pair. As you can see, they're pretty close, but they're not perfect. And if the world were perfect, it wouldn't be. The night I was given the Hedrick Award, I was reminded actually of a statement when they honored Yogi Berra by retiring his number when he retired. And his quote for the evening, "I'm a lucky guy, and I want to thank everyone for making this night necessary." I want to say I'm a lucky guy. I want to thank you all for making this program necessary. I want to invite you all to save the date, write this on your calendar, October 26th to 29th, 2018, a year from now. We will have a fiesta of roses in San Diego at which I will be installed as president of the American Rose Society. We will have a Mexican theme to it because this is what San Diego is about. We will have, there's a certain irony here, it's right around Halloween, which is celebrated in Mexico as the Day of the Dead. So we're going to have a Day of the Dead dancers and Day of the Dead celebration, but it will conclude with a tour of Donna and I, our garden in Escondido, a presidential reception, where you will get to in person see that garden I've shown you pictures of, and to entice you further, we will have a mariachi band and a taco wagon. And that is the end. Thank you.